every brand might say, no, it's 21 to 40 female or men that are buying this specific product. That's it. Broad's the only thing that works. There's no segments within it. I completely disagree with that. There always will be segments within that I think you can go a little bit deeper and get a little bit more out of. We found this across the board.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us, everyone, for the webinar today on reporting. This webinar is sponsored by Northbeam, and it's brought to you in partnership with Northbeam and Foxwell Digital, my company. So glad to have my good friend, Zach Stuck here. And yeah, if you are watching this and have questions as time goes on, go ahead and ask them in the Q&A section, and we'll make sure to get to those throughout the webinar. We're going to do some content and get into the weeds, and we're going to get really nerdy. Like, one of the things I want to do with these is always make sure that it feels like a conversation that Zach and I would just be having together instead of just making it feel like a webinar, right? Because I think we've all watched a lot of really boring webinars, and I don't want ours to be boring. I want it to be full of value for all of you that have taken the time to be here today. So thank you. And if you have follow-up questions as well, feel free to email me via my website at foxwelldigital.com. And I'm happy to follow up and get things answered from Zach, or get him looped in, or get the team from Northbeam looped in as time goes on. So let's go ahead and get into it. Let me make sure I have everything here. So as you go about reporting, which is a massive topic, obviously, first of all, how do you even report in the short term and long term? I mean, obviously you manage your agency, which has brands, and then you manage your own brands that you own. So it's probably a little bit different in some nuances, but how do you even begin to make decisions in the short and long term of what's working?
Sure. So, I'll kind of give you both examples, right? So, there's a lot, right? That's a lot of nuance to that, short, long term agency, my own brands. I think the first thing comes down to use case, right? So let's pick a specific product or brand and let's talk about that one, and then I can kind of expand from there. So a lot of our clients on the agency side, our North Star KPIs are blended ROAS or MER, right? I hate that term is interchangeable because I wish it was just one, but blended return on ad spend is kind of the North Star KPI that we're looking at to make sure that profitability is in line as brands are growing, right? So when breaking down blended return on ad spend, I think a lot of us are familiar with that term. The goal of that is that brands have a good understanding of their fixed expenses, their variable expenses, which could be everything from shipping costs fluctuating to, agency expenses or agency costs kind of fluctuating based on percentage of ad spend, right? So the biggest thing that we try and get out of the gate from our clients is just an understanding of what are your COGS, what is your blended return ad spend need to be, what are your fixed expenses, what are your variable expenses, just so we can do a basic breakdown. It's essentially trying to take a rough P&L and understand where do my numbers need to be for you to be happy and in line with your growth goals, right? And we have some clients that come to us that say hey, we would rather stay at 20% net profit every month and grow 5% month over month. And then we have some clients that are yeah, we can fluctuate that down to 5 to 10% net profit every month, but we want to grow, we want to double every month for the next 6 months, right? So I think starting with a high level metric, blended return on ad spend, MER, same thing, right, is kind of the first thing that we look at. And even for my own brand, that is something that's really important to me, being able to kind of calculate things down and understand if my own apparel brand, which I can talk about today, I kind of wanted to just open up some of those numbers because I feel like that's will be helpful to actually see the hard numbers behind an actual brand. I have to be a little bit a little cautious with sharing some stuff on the agency side, but I can at least share some specifics for my own brand. But so starting with that, I think that's the first thing, right? And then from there, then secondary and kind of almost most important KPIs that we're looking at is new customer acquisition cost, right? So blended return on ad spend is great, but if you're not acquiring new customers, getting them into your business that then can allow you to recapture them, increase their LTV, all that good stuff, right? Which then should continue to increase your blended return on ad spend over time. If your NCPA, new customer CPA, isn't in a great spot, that is another KPI that we're looking at next. And then outside of that, we're trying to understand what is the ROI or return on ad spend from individual channels as best as we can. And then that's where a tool like Northbeam starts to really become helpful, right? So I guess I can just stop there and then we can start to dive into specifics if you want.
Yeah, I think the thing that strikes me is reporting is one of these things, and decision-making is one of these things that everybody feels like they aren't doing as good of a job as they could. There's a big line between And again, this is where it becomes like, for those of you that are watching this live too, I mean, this is where it becomes like the Andrew and Zach, like speaking in a way that we would without, if you guys weren't here watching. Like, I think a lot of it is people either give too much information and they like show a bunch of stuff to clients. Like I was looking at this dashboard recently with a colleague, and they're showing them what the Facebook reported ROAS was, and they're showing them like in platform and then third party. And honestly, it was way too much, because the agency themselves were only looking at the third party tool to make decisions for the most part, like from a purchase standpoint. Now they were looking at in platform for like creative data and like that. And then they were looking at Google Analytics for like time on site data, which is, they said was a suggestion that we gave them, which I thought was great based on the UTM parameters. But like, it's this question of how do you report internally and externally, which is actually the next question on my list. But it's also this question of what are you looking at? And to me, what strikes me when I ask you that question is that there's these baseline things that we all need before we move forward. And we didn't have to do this before, for the record. Like, I think it would have been good if we had done this, but like a lot of us were like, what's your CPA goal? And people were like $20. And you're like, great, I'll get it for 15. And then you would just run it, like, and now in order to be an advertiser, you have to talk about this stuff, because otherwise you're not going to be successful.
Totally. And I think the other side of what you just said is almost over reporting. And I think a lot of that is just like the education stage, right? I think that a lot of, brand owners aren't in the weeds on the nuance of what it takes to get things to work, right?
Yeah.
And when they see return on ad spend in platform, when they maybe pull that up once a week or whatever, and they see a 0.1 and they're like, you're torching cash, what's going on?
Yeah.
And there might be a whole other nuance to like what we're making decisions around, right? So I think a lot of that is just starting to try and put all those pieces together so that they can understand, okay, here's all of the little, you said time on site, like there's these metrics within Facebook that we're looking at from a creative standpoint. I think truly like what it comes down to is like high level themes can help a brand understand what's working and what's not working. So like, this is kind of where I want to talk more about even my own brand, the apparel brand that I've been running for the last year. Basically launched this brand November 15th of last year. So we're coming up on 1 year. I can give a little bit of background to it because I think it's really helpful. And I think I can give some context that even though this is sponsored by Northbeam, like there's a lot of things I was able to learn outside of Northbeam too, as like a small launch brand that I think is helpful for context, that allows brands to kind of figure out what's working in those like themes. So from like a theme standpoint, like when we're reporting to our clients, and like one of the biggest things that a lot of our clients ask for is like, they kind of want to be told what to do, right? They're trusting you as the agency, as their partner, to be like, hey, I want you to recommend what we should be doing, and not necessarily the other way around. And I think that once, you can kind of get in a tough spot where you're almost reporting on all of these metrics in platform, Facebook, GA data, Northbeam, without even trying to explain like the high level themes of what's working, what's not working. So like that could be, hey, we're going after a new customer like piece instead of it being like, so I'm just going to use my own brand because I feel like using an example is really helpful. So I sell alpaca wool socks is the brand. It's called Hollow. And basically when I launched the brand last year, the idea was that we were actually going to sell to cyclists, because the gentleman that helped me start the business was like a semi-professional cyclist. He started using these alpaca socks, loved them. I'm like, cool, let's go after cyclists. So we started running ads on Facebook last year, kind of went after the interest audiences out of the gate and didn't see results. And I was like, okay, well, this is interesting. Like maybe cyclist isn't the actual customer demo. And this is where I think some clients and some brands start, where they're like, this is who my customer is. I'm certain about it. And this is where we kind of like, as an advertising agency, what I like to do now is like take a step back and say, okay, that doesn't seem to be working. It's not hitting your goals. Your new customer CPA isn't in line, and your blended return ad spend isn't where you want it to be. So what I did is kind of take a step back and then used broad targeting on Facebook and then static images to kind of figure out, if I run this to males 30 plus, and I make ads about hiking, cycling, running, and then even some like unique opportunities. So I tried like a hunting audience and a skiing audience. And I was like, maybe one of these will resonate. Let's just see. Immediately found out that hikers love warm socks that are better than sheep's wool socks. Like it was a very clear winner. And I would have never thought to do that unless I kind of took a step back and like the advertising side and just said, what can I look at from a high level and find a theme that we can go double down on? Now, if I was like a client talking to myself, I would love to know all about that. I don't necessarily care about like, hey, your click-through rate on the ads were X or Y. It's like, hey, we found a new theme that seems to be working, and let's continue to double down on that theme. And then we can kind of report on the nuance, like your CTRs, your cost per clicks, your like thumb stop ratios, your all of those things next, once we kind of figure things out. So I think the big thing is like, once a brand has a very good understanding of who their customers are, then I think getting into those nuanced details and really trying to just move the needle just a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. I think that's then when you can go into every bit of that nuance. But I think until a brand is doing significant revenue and really knows who their customer is, I don't think you need to do that. I think that it's more about trying to find the bigger themes and reporting on those bigger themes.
So, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff to talk about. I think one is many times when we talk about reporting, the first thing you're talking about, the first thing your mind goes to as an advertiser is, as you said, the numbers. And I think that we're kind of talking about steps now. Step one being establishing this measurement plan with the client of understanding, and maybe you're internally, you're saying to your bosses or to yourself, this is how I'm going to measure this. For a long time, it was hard to know what many of us were looking at. Now we kind of all have settled. And I just was talking about this yesterday too with another colleague about what are you going to look at during Black Friday, Cyber Monday to scale up or down. And it's blended return on ad spend, like you said. It's looking at new customer CPA are the main things that we're looking at. So I think it's establishing the plan. Then I think the point of the thematic reporting that you bring up is important, because that's the context that when you get into the data too much isn't brought to the client, which is what a strategic move that you as the agency have been brought on to do. Hey, client, we've learned that hikers are people that love to hike are a big part of the audience we weren't doing. And that has downstream effects of CRO implications, content implications, and the way that we're going to pitch this to bring it to more people. And this goes to a core tenet of, what we've taught for years in our courses and things of the horizontal scale that you're going for. You're trying to find more places to put things in a way that's outside of the core group. So I think that's interesting. Whereas many of us have started in reporting on looking at the numbers right out of the gates of the CTR or the purchase. It's let's establish a measurement plan. Let's establish the thematic testing that we're going to be going for, because that's a step above than a lot of other people are utilizing. You're not just pulling it into a dashboard, you're doing more of the narration behind it. And then you're getting into the numbers and saying, okay, here's how we're looking at this day to day.
Yep. Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think we're totally aligned. So I think it's like setting the baseline, right? Blend return and CPA. Obviously, every brand kind of has their own unique way to look at those two things, or if there's one other thing that they'd like to look at. I think that those are the most important. And then, yeah, like you said, so then it's trying to establish the themes, what I call them, of like, where are we going to where are we seeing the most success and where aren't we seeing success? Let's try to focus on a theme and try and find a win there. And then it's like, how are we reporting on that theme? I think is like the fanatical reporting. So like, we can get into the weeds on that if you want. So like,
yeah. So I mean, because to me, it's here's where my mind goes talking about like really hardcore reporting. The first thing that it goes to is, here's what I've heard. I've heard that a bunch of people report on a one-day click on Northbeam, and they love looking at a one-day click. And I know that you guys do this internally with some of the brands you work with. And so, and then there's like a one-day click multiplier thing that you're thinking about. Okay, so that's like one thing I hear about. Then I hear about things like, in the world of attribution, I'm like, well, I shouldn't look at things, but I should look at things every 3 days, because it's like hard, to really have a read on anything. So why am I looking at anything every day? And then it's like, I hear about all these people looking at creative metrics, and it's like, oh, okay, you're looking at thumb stop rate, you're looking at hold rate. And then I'm, you sit here and be like, well, does that shit even matter? Like straight up, like does looking at the creative metrics, does that actually mean it's like going to sell more? Or does it just mean that you're using it to build mid funnel and it's people are looking at it, but it's not necessarily something that's going to sell product. So that's where my mind goes in this stuff about reporting. So I'd be curious about like how you do it for yourself and then kind of how the agency does it.
So the one-day click ROAS in Northbeam has been huge for a lot of our clients. Now, the reason that we like that metric is because even with brands that are massive, that have longer windows, so like we work with a brand called Hexclad, they're a large spender, big brand, right? What we've even found is despite the fact that you would assume that the buyer purchase window might be like 30 days or north of 30 days, there's still a significant amount of people buying in a 1-day window. And if we're able to see like from an ad or an ad set, like for trying an audience, maybe we're trying like a 10% lookalike as a test, or maybe we're trying a new landing page or we're trying a new ad, right? If we're able to see on a 1-day click return on ad spend that number is significantly higher than others, we're seeing that audience, that ad, that whatever is driving like higher intent and has a good chance of capturing even more customers down the line. So like what we've been able to back into, and that's kind of what you said, is like we essentially have a 1-day click ROAS versus blended ROAS calculation for almost all of our customers that allows us to feel comfortable with a threshold of a 1-day click return on ad spend, knowing that we're capturing emails where they're getting into the funnel, like there's things like that are happening. So we found like for almost all of our brands, choosing a 1-day click return on ad spend, specifically looking at it in Northbeam versus even like Google Analytics, gives us a pretty good idea of what's going on. Now, of course, we're going to look at 1 day versus 7. We're going to look at 1-day click with 1-day view, but I still feel like the 1-day click is like the best metric to look at to see, are things looking good now and are people actually buying, right? Because we can always go after this, like, this is like the old 7-day click, 28-day click, 1-day view of like, things might happen in the future, but like, let's not assume that that's the case, right? Like, if our goal for our clients is to make them money and help them become profitable, like we should be making decisions on things that are driving revenue today. Now, the nuance to that is that we've found in a couple instances of brands where it's a harder sell, right? It's something that takes a little bit more education, something that takes a little bit more like convincing, that looking at 1-day click ROAS isn't necessarily the best metric. It's helpful, but then looking at another metric, which is really interesting, is like the cost per email signup in Northbeam is a really, really good indicator to see of potential success. So we have, and I'll be able to share some of this stuff after the fact. Some of it has like actual client data in it, so I would have to redact some stuff, but I can share a couple things after the fact. We do for an apparel brand that has like 200 AOV, a little bit more. They sell products to a different audience that's like a little bit more, it takes a little bit more conviction, a little bit more time for them to like make a decision. We found that by optimizing for cost per email signup is a really good indicator of future success for them. Now, not only does that mean future email revenue, but what that means is that if the cost per email signup in an audience or in an ad is extremely low, we're usually then seeing the 1-day click return ad spend numbers spike days 3 and 4 later. So meaning that like they had an opportunity to like come through this funnel, but just because 1-day click ROAS was low, but their cost per email signup was really low, meaning that like that audience has a lot of intent to buy, but maybe just not right in that 24-hour window. They might need 1 or 2 more touch points to like get that conversion. So like we've been able to use that metric for some brands that the 1-day click ROAS to blended ROAS doesn't correlate as easily. And that's been really interesting, right?
Well, I mean, that's right. So it strikes me in thinking about optimizing for an email signup. Especially if it's a higher AOV, the question is there more data that Meta would have on those that would sign up for an email that would be able to optimize those ad sets and make it faster in terms of learning? The answer is probably yeah, because there's more people that are going to sign up for an email than there would be that would buy on a 1 day. So it's like, it's a good test. It's an interesting test and one that Northbeam enables, I think, which is helpful.
I think the one thing that's really interesting about that though, Andrew, is that what we've seen though, is that Facebook will report a 0.1 return on ad spend because we're optimizing for purchase intent.
Sure.
And Northbeam will show a cost per email signup of like $10. And it's
sure.
If we didn't have that metric, even outside of it, we wouldn't put more dollars there to try and optimize for that audience, right? And like this is where we start to open up the whole can of worms of optimizing outside of Facebook's numbers versus Northbeam, right? Which we can dive deeper into.
I mean, I think, let me just say really briefly, I think welcome to those of you that have joined. Feel free to ask any questions in the question function. This webinar is brought to you by Northbeam. Glad to have all of you here. Zach, and talking about that side of it, it's like there's 2 schools of thought, it appears to be, on this now. So this is how my brain works. Sorry. So I'm like jumping to a different thing, everyone. So this is like I said, this is like a personal conversation between us. The first one is, I have seen more discussion recently about how numbers on Meta are matching third party, and people feel that there won't be a need for a third party tool in the future, then I've also seen people, and this is the camp that I'm in, honestly, is because of Meta doing all these modeled conversions and all this, the numbers are still wildly different. And I don't trust anything in Meta at all, other than purchase related data. ROAS, obviously, since that's in buckets, you can't trust that, but like purchases and whatever, I just don't feel that you can trust any of that. Even with 28-day click, like it's returning, it doesn't, that's not very helpful for me. Or like the windows and reporting, it's really challenging for me. And I just don't see that getting better because you're still having to deal with opt-outs and stuff like that. So like I'm in the second camp, but I've seen more discussion on this first camp. I'd be curious to your take on that, I guess.
It's all brand or product dependent. So like my sock brand, Apollo, the numbers that I'm seeing on a 1-day click ROAS from a Northbeam to a Google Analytics to Facebook actually line up quite well, but it's because the purchase intent it's an impulse purchase product, right? People are buying most likely from that ad to the listicle to the PDP, they're buying, right? So when that pass of data is so quick, I feel like it's doing a better job than it has been, but that doesn't work for every brand, right? So like this other apparel brand, that doesn't happen. Facebook's reporting like a 0.1 ROAS. Even Northbeam is pointing like a 0.2, 0.3 1-day click ROAS, but then our cost per email signup we're continuing to optimize for that for this one brand, and their blended ROAS continues to lift, right? So I think it's really brand dependent. That said, like I still see numbers that are all over the board in Meta, and like it's day to day, right? Like some days it feels like it's right, some days it doesn't feel like it's right, and that's where I do feel like using a tool like Northbeam on a 1-day click basis, or even GA, like a Facebook spend to GA revenue on that last click attribution is way better. Like I can trust it a lot more consistently because at least it's not just having these weird fluctuations of where there'll be 2x the purchases that I'm seeing that then even happened in Shopify for the day that Facebook is reporting now, which makes zero sense, right? So trusting Facebook's data in what I'm seeing there, I think that the creative metrics for sure, right? And I think we can talk about even like what I've seen in correlation of creative metrics to like
I definitely would be curious to hear your take on that.
So what's really interesting is like we treat creative metrics as a way to understand like, are we capturing attention more than anything else? Not if we're capturing results on the back end, purchases, whatever, are we capturing attention? And at what level are we capturing the attention that then can lead to results, right? So like I'm running a couple ads for the apparel brand that have like extremely high thumb stop ratios. Like I'm talking in the like 60s, which is crazy. But then you follow the correlation of that. And even though the thumb stop was way above the 1-day click return on ad spend and like the overall new customer CPA was lower than ads that had 40 thumb stop ratio, right? So like there isn't the correlation always from creative metrics to end results. But I think what it does help you understand is like, how can I capture the attention? And then how can I tell the story better that then might then lead to those results, right? So you have to kind of walk it all the way through. And so for me, like we're looking at thumb stop ratio is can we optimize for hooks? Then I'm looking at hold rate, right? So like thumb stop ratio, again, for those that don't look at this metric, 3-second video view plays divided by impressions. And then hold rate being through plays divided by 3-second video view plays, through plays divided by impressions. So like basically what I'm trying to figure out is like, how long are they watching that video? How long are they holding through that video? And can I capture that? Also, can I capture the attention on the first hook? And then how long am I going to hold them? What I'm then doing is if I get an ad that has a really high, thumb stop ratio, but a bad hold rate, I'll do that same hook in the beginning. And then I'll try a different body of the video to see if I can get them to capture the attention a little bit longer. And then I'll watch the spikes within. Again, these are all meta metrics, right? That you can see in Northbeam, but these are all metrics that I trust. I can see the spike of attention when they're like watching it or when they bump, right? And then that's usually where I'm starting to see like, oh, I mentioned for my sock brand, I don't know, 3x warmer than sheep's wool, like 7 seconds into the video. And that's where the attention seems to like hold. And that's where I get them. And then that ad has a better return on ad spend, right? So it's like, I'm using those as kind of my like, can I grab their attention? Can I tell the problem solution? Can I tell the story? Can I help them understand what the product is, why they should buy it? That's all I'm really caring about there. I'm not really saying like those metrics shouldn't do the heavy lifting on the back end necessarily, but they should help that, right? So there isn't always a correlation from thumb stop or hold rate to return on ad spend or new customer CPA. But those are the metrics that we're trying to look at to at least get that attention so then we can tell the story a little bit better that then should lead to the end result.
Sure. So I think that's really interesting. I want to talk about two things in relation to reporting that are on the top of my mind. One is, how does what you've talked about already in terms of looking at the metrics you're looking at, both in soft metrics and purchase related metrics, how does that relate to the holiday season when you're in a time crunch with a sale or whatever? Like, are you looking at the same things? Are you looking at different things? Are you looking at what changes? Or maybe it's the same.
Candidly, like we found that year over year, like evergreen ads typically have more longevity during this like big sale periods.
Yeah.
I know that this is something that gets mentioned sometimes on Twitter, but like truly, I think that that's the case. Now, taking like evergreen ads that have historic performance of good thumb stop ratios, good hold rates, good return on ad spend, good NCPAs, and then layering in, hey, it's a Black Friday sale, 30% off site wide or whatever as a top banner, or as just like a little button to try against those metrics or to try against those. Great. But like, don't try and go swing for the fences on thumb stop ratio and hold rates during BFCM. Like, I think it's more focused on those key high level metrics, which is new customer CPA and blended return ad spend, right?
Yeah.
Acquiring customers profitably. Like, we shouldn't be using this like kind of crazy period to go test crazy hook rates, crazy hold rates, crazy thumb stop ratios. In my opinion, we should be taking the learnings that we've had. We might try, some of that language on top or some of that language in headlines, but we're not necessarily focused on that during that period. I think it's more focused on like the hard metrics of what does that actual performance look like.
It's interesting because I agree with you. And on the webinar that we did with David Herman, he talked about utilizing basically not really running to the top funnel anything different during the holiday, and how he'll just be chill. He might change the mid to lower part of the funnel, but it's mostly changes in the landing pages. Well, one question I have too there's a lot more questions we can get into in reference to reporting. And then Mike has a question in the Q&A, and feel free, anyone, if you have questions, to put them in there. If it was just you and me on this, as just thinking in that mindset, this wasn't recorded or public, and I asked you, what about reporting do you feel like misleads people and is like total BS and is something you wish people did differently?
That's a really good question. I think those soft metrics on the creative side, people get too obsessed about, candidly.
Yeah,
like
I agree with that.
My thumb stop ratio is 60%. Like I just said, like it didn't actually produce the results, right? So it's like, I think over reporting on that stuff is important. It is like misleading. I think then like overcomplicating things, right? Back to my initial point of trying to find themes and explain themes to clients and themes to brands and themes like to yourself. What is working from a high level that we can understand and like put more deeper thought into? I think like that's the thing, right? Because it's like you over report, you have, like you mentioned, like you've got your 1-day click ROAS, your Facebook metrics, your GA data, your session data. It's like, it's so overwhelming. It's almost hard to like, what do we do with this? Right. So like trying to take a step back and look at what is working from a high level and how can we think deeper about that? So I think this is almost to like Mike Rizzo's question, candidly, is like, how are you thinking about this strategy for landing pages and stuff like that? So to my point earlier about the sock brand, right? And I'm just going to use this because I can give actual numbers and talk about it. I found this like audience that was working that was hunters, right? Which I would have never thought. I would have thought cyclists and hunters are like very different people, but for some reason, like they love this product and it's resonating with them. Then it's like, cool. Can I go deeper with that? Can I build a listicle or a landing page that focuses on just talking to that audience? And then can I run an interest audience that's just that audience instead of running broad? It's like, this is where then I can go deeper on the high level theme that's working to see if I can get more out of what I'm, those ad dollars that I'm putting in. I would rather and this is what we talk about at Homestead, is like, I would rather us talk about the high level themes, what's working high level, and then how we can go super deep into that one versus trying to look at all of this data and report on all of this data, where then it's just so much nuance between it. It's like seeing like one purchase versus two purchases, even though like the return on ad spend might be triple, it's like that isn't enough conclusive data to make decisions around, right? Give me bigger themes of like things that are working that we can go make decisions around versus like the little nuance of like, this ad has a 0.6 thumb stop and this one has a 0.55. So let's kill the 0.55 one, right? I think that that's where like way too much nuance on some of the data when there's not enough volume is like, I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make.
So I hear you. I think, so on the funnel structure piece itself. So you're talking about, I assume you have some sort of broad campaign running. So broad, and then there's a broad landing page that matches. And then there's these smaller segments that have a landing page with the ad that matches, that has continuity between the ad and the landing page that are to those smaller segments. Yep. Great ideal horizontal scale. And I think to your earlier point about creative as well, in terms of not just looking at creative metrics for this has a good hold rate, but looking deeply at what part in the video has held people the most and using that thematically across trying something new from a language standpoint. That's also super cool to think about, and is another piece about reporting, which is not typically discussed. So yeah, I think that's really cool. But do you want to talk more about Hollow, or what would you like to talk about?
I mean, I think that was kind of Mike's question, right? Which is like, can you go into more detail on your landing page strategy for scaling new brands like Hollow? Okay, so yeah, let's just talk about that. I will pull a couple things up, share my screen, and we can go from there.
See if we're able to. And again, everybody, if you have questions, feel free to hit it in the Q&A segment. We're happy to answer questions as we go through this. We'll be on this webinar for about another 20 minutes or so, going through and talking deeply about reporting. Zach, are you able to pull it up? Does it give you the permissions?
Yeah, I should be good here.
We'll see.
Okay, cool. Okay, can we see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to run through like as quickly as I can how I thought about this for a brand, a launch brand, a brand that you're trying to crack and just like figure out what's going on. So this brand, again, context, launched last year in November. Essentially, I gave it a 90-day window to see if I could find product market fit. I found some product market fit and then ordered more inventory to go after it this year. Okay, so what I started with out of the gate, you can kind of see this is my like ad account. Pretty simple structure, right? I mean, I have a remarketing campaign, which was, I believe, a 180-day window. I have a prospecting testing campaign, which is like an ABO. And then I had a cost cap campaign. Simplicity, I think, out of the gate is like what I like to see. And then I think that allows you to kind of understand a little bit more from a higher level. Out of the gate, essentially what I was running was, let's go back to, I think I launched on the 5th. So I was running a couple different tests, right? So I was running static images. I was running a few UGC videos, but I think the one thing like that I want to hit on is like the landing page component here. So I was running static images, as you can see, to two different landing pages, one being this what I'm labeling as A9, which is a little bit more of a general landing page, right? So I think like listicle, I think the biggest thing that people make mistakes on with like when they go try a listicle is like they try to get too narrow with the audience too quickly. Like you kind of have to think about it as I'd like to almost use a listicle from like a broader sense to understand what seems to be resonating. And then if I want to try ads with a different audience, right? So like this is statics to broad. Then I tried statics to deer hunting. And like for some reason, again, I'm looking at in-platform numbers here. The deer hunting, this matched with GA, this matched with Northbeam, but like the deer hunting audience seemed to resonate, right? This is then where I'm like, okay, can I go run ads from instead of to this kind of general listicle, pretty straightforward listicle to a hunting listicle, right? And can I see more results from that? This is kind of the way that I think about going about testing when it comes to trying new audiences, trying new segments. If you're finding like wins from a high level from broad and it's cool, can I go try that with a different audience where I think using interest is like a decent way to do that? Is there some traction there? Great, cool. Then let's go try to make a listicle that's more focused on that audience.
Yeah. So you're saying instead of, it's in stages. It's just like anything. It's just like anything else.
So basically starting with, as you can see, I'm running a lot more like out of the gate here. I was running a lot of broad men 30 plus to the same landers. I was trying some UGC. I was trying some scripted videos. Now, like, as you can see here, like these thumb stop ratios, like I was talking about. So this is some content that we produced. Thumb stop ratios, fantastic, right? Like north of 50, hold rate north. But then when you go and look at 1-day click return on ad spend and like last click in GA, the return, it just wasn't there. It wasn't performing. So then what I ended up doing is, let's just look at this ad real quick. This hook of like burning the socks in a fire resonated really well. And I was like, okay, cool. That hook is working, right? Back to my points earlier in the video. How can I go add a different body to this, just using that same hook to see if we can get a better result at the overall? So then if you go up more recently, let's look over this last weekend, you can see that I ran a different body with the same hook. right?
Mm-hmm.
And then again, we go a little bit deeper by calling out hunters, right? So I think the big thing there is like there's definitely stages that I'm following. And as far as like the KPIs that I'm looking at those soft metrics, like I said, for the attention, but then I'm looking at the end result, which is that last day click, 1 day click return on ad spend in Northbeam, and new customer CPA and cost per email sign up. If all of those are lining up and my blended return on ad spend continues to go up, then I'm looking really good, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how I go about looking at that.
I think what's interesting, Zach, about talking through this is that many of us feel and believe and focus the reporting on one segment of it, right? So it's one thing and you're looking at the numbers and you might be looking at soft metrics and you're looking at purchase and that's it. And I think what you're talking about here is taking the reporting to the next level, which is using both the creative and the numbers to develop and identify thematic information of different places that you can go. And I think Sebastian has a question about how does targeting broader themes and trends apply to working with larger brands, say 500K a month in ad spend that already know their ideal audience? In what ways can agencies work to support these brands post iOS 14? I still think that many brands that believe they know their target audience, there's still room in these other parallel niche audiences to run things alongside of their broad campaign or to run things alongside of what they're already doing. So I think the way that agencies can work to support it is looking at things of the thematic parts of this from the creative standpoint. And I would like to talk about how you use reporting to like not just creative reporting, but the numbers reporting to look back at different themes that you might not have thought of before. An example of this would be Google Analytics in market segments, for example, right? To identify different places and different potential niches you could target. But that's the way I think that there always is room to build that. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I think I can kind of correlate that into what Sebastian is asking here. So I'm just going to use our client because I referenced them earlier, HexCloud. So broader audience, bigger brands, spending significant ad dollars, right? There's huge opportunities to build these kind of a little bit more micro funnels for each one of them, right? So let's just use cookware in general, right? There's a lot of different types of people that use cookware, right? There's home chefs, there's people that just like might only cook an egg, right? I think that there's a lot of opportunities for you to say like, are you a foodie? Are you not? Are you this? Like, can you build a ad that has a hook that resonates with people about how you can replace 4 of your pans with 1 pan, right? Does that resonate for you because you live in an apartment and you're whatever, you don't have a ton of space? Great. Then can you build a listicle around that? Can you then convince them more and educate them more about why that product can do that using the listicle and then send them to a product page? I think that like broader targeting is great for identifying these kind of other themes and other like opportunities to build these like other funnels within, right? Because when you're trying to spend $500,000 a month, when you're trying to spend north of $1 million a month, you do want to have more opportunities, right? Because again, if you're just trying to run just broad targeting 2 PDPs, like there's just not always enough opportunity there. But when you can go a little bit deeper and understand, hey, this is like a segment of my audience. Like for my own brand, for example, I can run funnels to hunting. I can run funnels to skiing. I can run funnels to runners. I can run funnels, right? I think that that's what then gives you that horizontal scale that allows you to go deeper, right? That's what allows you to spend at the rate that you're at. And I think like for me, for example, like I think I'm spending like $8,000 a day right now. Without those like multiple funnels, I don't think I'd be able to spend at that pace at the blended rate.
Right.
No. So the biggest thing that I feel like what can agencies do to support them is, can you build those micro funnels, right? Can they help you build listicles? Can they help you build ads that allow you to find that segments within your customer base and go a little bit deeper, right? And I think like every brand can do this. Every brand might say, no, it's 21 to 40 female or men that are buying this specific product. That's it. Broad's the only thing that works. There's no segments within it. I completely disagree with that. There always will be segments within that I think you can go a little bit deeper and get a little bit more out of. We found this across the board.
I agree with you. And by the way, it makes my ego feel great, to be honest, because we released our scaling course, 5 years ago now, our first course. And in like the main tenet of that course was talking about this. So it's cool that it's like still true, which I know, I mean, because we obviously run an agency too. It's just good to validate that. In the research side of it, of finding these segments, some of it is looking at, well, how do you look at GA data or, like a third party Northbeam type data to identify these segments you might not have thought of?
We're using creative hooks to understand.
Right.
We're using post-purchase surveys to understand what people are using products for.
Beautiful.
We're using GA to understand a little bit more of those like audience segments like that you mentioned, right? Sometimes we'll find those to be very helpful for brands. Sometimes we won't find them to be as helpful, but I think GA can be helpful in that sense. I think it's a mix of those. I like creative. I like ad creative for identifying those, and I like post-purchase surveys. I think that those are the best two that I feel like we get the clearest data around that. Yeah,
cool.
That's what I do.
Let's answer a few questions here. And if you have questions, folks, feel free to hit it in the Q&A function. Jonathan, who is a Foxwell Founders member of our membership, creative campaign set for social proofing, creative validation. Do you have that set up or not?
So it's a really good thing. Like, it's a really good question. I, for my own brand, don't run social proofing. Now, I literally just told like Riley, who runs Homestead, why am I not running social proofing? Because this is kind of obvious. I have a few ads that have photos from previous customers in the comments that then get kind of like moved up to the top when they're like, hey, I love my product, right? It's kind of a no-brainer. I think doing that, the way that I would set that up and the way that I'm probably going to start doing and the way that we've done it for other brands, we'll go pull 5-star reviews from Lookendo or anything like that, those email addresses of people that have left great reviews, and then run a audience in Facebook, very low budget, $5 to ads that we want to put more social proofing behind. Now, if that's the question, or I can't understand if that's the question, or if it's you build ads to then social proof them, then to launch them. So, I mean, I can kind of explain that component.
I think do you have it set up for social proofing? And if so, how? So you partially answered it. Yeah.
Okay.
The answer is like, you don't, but you will.
So I set up, I'm not sure if we're using like the same terminology. So basically, like, I set up all of my ads under a campaign called 00 Creative, where I build the ads as original and then I duplicate them and then select the post IDs to so quote unquote social proof them. But then if I want to get actual social proof behind them, then you could do like what I mentioned, where it's like running small ad budgets to previous purchasers that have left 5-star reviews to get a little bit more of that actual social proof within the ad. Now, creative testing, I think that's the other part of that question.
It's under answered. A creative campaign set for social proofing, creative validation.
Got it. So, yep. So then it's like I typically run almost, and I actually I had all of our account managers jump on a call last night to kind of talk about this briefly, but we still run almost always to do, when we are doing creative testing, to the best performing audience. Now, that on the most part is like broad, but for example, if we see like over the course of a month where a 10% lookalike audience or maybe an interest stack performs better than broad across the board, then we'll run creative testing to that audience. But on average, we run it to broad out of the gate to kind of understand where an ad would perform from a high level. But again, like I said, like there's some accounts where we'll find consistently where a 10% lookalike might get better results than broad. So we might just run it there anyways.
Yeah. Let's answer Dane's question. How would you increase profitability during Black Friday, Cyber Monday, if everyone is running promotions and lowering their overall profit margins? And what metrics would you review to increase profit margins?
Really good question, right? Bringing the heat. I think that the biggest thing is trying to be smart about your offer. So like, I think that just starting with that, right? You can go look at my brand, Hollow Socks. The one thing that's really interesting about this is this is kind of going to be my Black Friday sale. It's running as a fall sale right now. It's a tiered offering, buy more, save more. What's really interesting about it is it's 10% off, then 20%, then 30%. The 10% off also unlocks free shipping. I feel like that's pushed up AOV, which is great. Now, the biggest thing here is like, even though it has 10, 20, 30, and up to 30, which is all the language on the site, up to 30% off. On average, my average discount is 18%. So I think a really interesting way to captivate people is like, hey, we're running up to X% off of our website. And if you want to unlock that percentage off, you're going to push your AOV so far up that it's going to make sense for you to be willing to do that. So I would say like thinking about your offer is probably the biggest thing that's going to allow you to increase your profit margin during that period without just offering a discount across the board, right? Like I could easily offer 30% off site wide, but then my average order value would go down, my overall profit would go down versus offering like an up to a buy more, save more offer, which protects that margin a little bit better.
Well, and you told me one time about how you had pinpointed a number in reference to Hollow. It was a dollar value that once you knew that it was above this dollar value, it was like, it's all gravy. So, and every brand kind of has that. Obviously, that's like you try to set like a CPA, but then there's sort of like this dream number that you're like, if we can get an order above $130 or whatever it is,
Right.
then it's like we can discount even more. We can discount much more deeply, and we really want to get people to that number. How do you establish that?
So that was just like testing, right? So I think I initially out of the gate in the first 90 days last year, I ran 15% off for 10 days. Then I flipped it to 20% off, then 30% off. Then I realized the 20% off actually netted more profit than the 30. And I was like, okay, cool. Can I try a buy more, save more that offers a 10, 20, 30 to see where that threshold ends up? And I found out that even the 10, 20, 30, I'm actually averaging like an 18% off. So like, that's kind of where I was like, hey, if I on average am willing to do up to 30, where some brands might not be willing to discount that high, but that pushes my AOV up to 120, 150, gravy.
Right.
Text margin.
We're going to be on this webinar for probably another 5 or 6 minutes or so. So we're going to answer a few more questions and then we will wrap things up. But Martin and Dane, by the way, Foxwell Founders member, Martin, Foxwell Founders member. So appreciate you guys bringing the heat to this webinar sponsored by Northbeam. First, thank you for finally revealing the brand, Martin says. Question 1, how do you approach LTV and repeat purchases? Are you first order profitable? And if not, do you have a specific time frame in mind? So let's answer that one first.
Sure. I mean, for my own brand, yes, first purchase profitable, kind of averaging like a 25 NCPA, 75 AOV. So grateful that I am. I think it's time of year, somewhat, if you go look at the funnel, it's pretty robust, took a lot of energy to do everything that we're doing right. I think that's one of the biggest themes that I've been trying to explain to brands is that to win today, you have to do everything right, which is really comes down to like, doing all this reporting is amazing, but if you're not doing each stage right, if you're not trying direct response ads that are more like hook based, video based, and then if you're not trying listicles or landers, and then if you're not trying different offers on your site, and trying to improve your, UX, CRO, your site, like it's going to be a little bit harder, right? Like it's not the glory days, 2018, 2017, when you could just launch DPAs and things were rocking. So how are you looking at increasing LTV? I think the biggest thing there is own channels are incredible if you do them the right way, right? I think that channels like email and SMS have so much potential that if you're doing them in depth and if you're really building out robust flows for future upsells and like even just education, I think that is the biggest way that we look at it at Homestead across brands that are doing 9 figures and brands that are launch brands, right? Now, that's kind of my answer is I think that you can go in a very deep rabbit hole on the own channel side that should drive the LTV. And the way that I look at, and this is like a little bit of a hot take, but when I'm looking at my brand, I'm not necessarily looking at, hey, I'm getting 30% of revenue from email is like amazing, great thing, because paid traffic is driving that. Paid traffic is driving new signups. Paid traffic is driving the people that are signing up and getting that. What I'm really looking at is like the flow revenue and the percentage of revenue from flows that are coming post-purchase. And I think like more brands should pay attention to that than just saying, hey, 30% of my revenue is coming from email. Because I think a lot of that traffic that's then converting via email is actually coming from paid. So that's kind of how I think about that. How much has your CPA improved when you compare your current numbers to your first month? So, I mean, out of the gates, like on the 15th of October, when I relaunched, CPA was $75. Now, like I mentioned, it's $25. And I think that really comes down to optimizing that funnel based on those themes that I found, right? I tried running it to runners and everyone and I found a theme that seemed to be working and I doubled down on that, built a listicle around that, kind of went in deeper. So I think that if you find those themes that are working or those audience segments that are working and you try and build funnels specifically for them, I think that that's where you can capture the most profitability.
Cool. What reporting tools do you prefer? If somebody's asking, are there specific dashboards you like to use? I'm curious to your take on that.
Yeah. So Northbeam is like the go-to for looking at one-day click return ad spend, which we talked a lot about, right? I also use Google Analytics. If you're a smaller brand and you want to kind of like try to understand a one-day click ROAS, looking at Google Analytics which I can do a quick screen share and just show you kind of how I would look at it in Google Analytics. See if I can do this really fast. Cool. So this is looking at Google Analytics. We'll just look at like the last, 7 days or so. Google Analytics, acquisition traffic, source medium. If you're using UTMs correctly, you should be able to pinpoint kind of where your campaigns are performing just from Facebook all the way to last click, right? You can then use keyword to pull ad sets. You can then use, these are my ad sets, and then you can use ad content then to find the actual ad. So this is the way that I've been using Google Analytics to look at things. And then I'm kind of comparing my main dashboard, which is Northbeam, to GA, to Facebook to kind of look at those soft metrics.
Cool. Very, very cool. Well, I appreciate your time, Zach. And if there's other questions that people have, feel free to email me via Foxwell Digital on my site, and I'm happy to connect you over with Zach. But Zach, thank you for your time and for sharing all your learnings today. And yeah, man, we'll look forward to getting this out and sending out the recording to everyone. And thank you for everyone for joining.
Thanks, Andrew.